help us out here. So again, make sure you think.
Problem thing, it's always hard to follow Frank, of course. This is a note I mentioned earlier about the offshore rehab and recovery for the wildlife on there. During the Mexis exercise, we actually simulated using those trailers and put them on OSVs offshore, and that worked pretty well. Part of source control management on there, and it's part of when I retired from the Coast Guard 2005, I had the privilege working for wild well control for 9 years before I started work with Anadarko in 2014, and during that time I was on Macondo for 6 months. I kind of learned about well control and source control, my baptism by fire, I guess you could say. But you know, and I think it's important seeing where the model on it, if you haven't been exposed, understanding what you know, the well control and source control on there. A little bit historically, you know, some basic methodology really hadn't changed over 50 years. Some of the terming you hear about capping, well control, relief well. You know, a lot of the focus was really working at the BOP or really at the wellhead. You know, 2010 really offered a better model, or really more transparent. Up to that point, you know, I would say, you know, and I'll use an example, you know, Frank Paskowitz was involved, as well as Admiral Allen and a few other folks in Exxon, when we had a spill of national significance exercise in the Gulf of Mexico in 2002. During that exercise, you know, we had 125,000 barrels per day scenario off of Louisiana. We had a chemical tanker off of Lake Charles. We had another tanker off of Port Arthur. You know, part of that, and and it's already published, International Oil Spill Conference, talking about the exercise. We really didn't get into source control because we really didn't understand it. Frankly, up to that point, you know, you had red deer, wild well, cod, boots and cooch. You know, well, they're taking care of it. And I remember the discussion during that exercise. You know, 2010 really kind of defined a little more transparency and understanding on it, rather than just the well cappers will take care of it. And some of the things kind of define some of the key activities. A little bit was referring to Gary's presentation on there, where you had debris removal, dispersants, BOP intervention. You know, basically, you know, what you say well response, you know, you're looking at, you know, try to cut off the head of the snake, the rest of the body. If you could stop the source, you could stop the rest of the spill from progressing. You know, kind of defining terminology of folks that haven't been exposed, you know, what really is source control, you know, at least from, you know, looking at from the uncontrolled release of hydrocarbons in the environment. You know, historically we've looked into pipelines, vessel groundings, collisions, offshore platforms from wells, which I'll get a little bit more into rigs. Could be short-term, long-term, different response levels, whether a minor incident. You know, not every well incident results in a you know, in a Macondo type of incident. Really, the last one that was at that catastrophic level was back in 1979 with Ixtop started in Mexico. And in the mid-2000s, a lot of the production wells on there from Rita, Katrina, Ivan, and Ike, you know, impacted some of them, but nothing near that level on there. So, you know, it's going to vary different levels. You know, for the focus purposes moving forward, you're looking at a worst-case discharge. You know, kind of defining, at least from an offshore E&P, you know, it's a generic term, really related, again, the intervention of the wild well at a source or the wellbore in an effort to haul or control the release of hydrocarbons. Again, focus on similar what Open 90 does for vessels. You're looking at a worst case scenario, and that's really more at the beginning of the lifetime of the well. Most wells are really designed for economic and use purposes, you know, 20, 25 years. That number you're looking at is really the beginning on there with the highest risk on there, where you're looking at, you know, you've seen in public where it's, you know, 200,000 or 300,000, 400,000 barrels per day. You know, as we showed during our Mexis exercise, when we're on day 10, our worst case discharge for that well that we were working at Lucius was right around 350,000 barrels a day. By 10, that well was only capable of producing about 200,000 barrels. At the time we got to day 13 and 14, our max capacity was already down to right around 140,000, 150,000 barrels a day. And it's just showing examples when you're looking at, you know, the complexities when you're looking at source control. Some of the activities, you know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, you're managing SIMOPS. The beginning here when Monica showed all the vessels out there from Macondo, you might have 40, 50, 60 different vessels out there. You know, it's measuring what's called simultaneous operation or SIMOPS. You know, not all those vessels could be operating at the same time, you know, doing the same activities, really kind of orchestrated almost like a surgery. you know, at certain times, you know, you're going to go ahead and do the BOP intervention. You're doing a survey at the beginning. Not all is going to have debris removal. Not all is going to involve with a rig falling off, you know, dealing with debris removal. But at the end of the day on there, you're ultimately trying to control the source of that well. Relief well drilling and intercepting the well kill. You're going to hear that a lot with well activities. And that's really an ongoing contingency. Not all wells are going to always need a relief well. You know, the beginning on it, you may be able to kill the well, whether it's with seawater or kill fluid. You might do a BOP intervention, but just shutting off a wellhead valve or a BOP valve. But always a contingency, particularly we're looking at worst case scenario. And we exercise that predominantly during most of our exercises. You're looking at relief well component later on as a worst case scenario. With all else fails, you're able to drill a separate well that actually intercepts the well that's blowing out and be able to try to kill it. And you're looking at, again, looking at different activities. You know, depending on the jurisdiction operator, it's really not it's not really a one-size-fits-all. It's really designed organization works best for that operator or that committee. This one, again, just shows purely an example, similar with Gary showed earlier. Some operators that just have to show the example that it shows as a branch under operations. Some operators actually has source control as a fifth section. It really doesn't matter which way, really what works for that organization. It just kind of shows an example where it would fit in. Some of the complexities, again, this is strictly an organization. You could go to different operators out there. Everyone's going to show different organization, but it just shows some more of the complexities on there. You know, I mentioned sign-offs. Typically may have its own group. You'll have containment, which is probably one of the busier ones. That's where you're capping or debris removal. Again, it shows a different organization. Rather than going all the details and the technical part of it, but it's more emphasizing the point that source control is really, I would say, in its own entity. When we're looking from a spill response, an organization where traditionally where you may bring a salver to look at vessels, it's a little more simplistic. With source control, there's just a lot of moving parts, a lot of resources coming in. A lot of folks, you know, when we, with Post McConnell, we're looking at the capping stacks that Helix or SWRP or MWCC were coming out with on there, but it's more than just a capping stack. There's just, again, a lot of equipment, a lot of people, a lot of vendors. You can see at least this organization on there, you know, the red and the blue that shows the difference between what an RP could provide, and the red part or the blue part would be maybe what a vendor would supply, and with an RP could provide. I would say, you know, I would say pretty much across the board for most operators, it's going to be a collective effort out there. We're going to, you know, it's hard to have, you know, some of the majors like Exxon may have a little more expertise than some of the independents out there, but really you're bringing a collaborative effort. A lot of people, a lot of expertise is out there. You know, with the flow engineering, a key part, Bessie's part of that, whether you're using Ad Energy or Wildwell, there's different vendors that are looking at the flow engineering, monitoring the flows with the pressure temperatures. Depending on your equipment provider in for the Gulf of Mexico, again, it's either Helix or MWC. They're bringing equipment, whether it's a capping stack or cap and flow, bringing safety and a lot of other stuff. But it's a big organization on there. You know, for this organization, for our exercise, you know, we had. There was over 300 people there. About 140 of them were in at ARCO folks, and about half of those were just in source control alone. So it just kind of gives you an idea briefly about what source control is about. So.